Hi friends, today we are talking about AM and PM. We're on page 625, chapter 10, lesson 6. Okay, so let's talk about AM and PM. So AM really means the time after midnight. So if we look on the timeline, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Let's look at this in terms of a timeline. Okay, here's my timeline. And let's put midnight here. And then noon right about there. So noon is like when we have lunch, right? Noon time. And then I'm going to add midnight over here. So if we look at AM, we're looking at this time right here. This is AM. So after midnight, we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to put down there. And then the clock starts over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12 again is midnight. So what usually happens in the AM? Well, in the AM, for most of it, we're kind of sleeping, right? After midnight, from 1 to maybe you wake up at 6 in the morning. Some of the things we might do in the morning might include wake up, right? We can wake up in the morning. Or we usually wake up in the morning. We have breakfast is another thing that happens in the morning. One thing that happens in my house is somebody has to feed the dog. Those are all things that might happen in my house in the morning. So if we're talking about things that happen after midnight, and I like to think of see the A and the M, it reminds me after midnight. So in the hours after midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., and then comes 12 noon. And at the time that it becomes 12 noon, it is now what we call PM. And you can remember that by saying past morning. So all of these hours are what we consider PM. Anything after noon is PM. So when we think about things that we might do in the PM, we might, we might go to, although right now we're not really going anywhere in the PM, are we? But back when things get hopefully back to normal soon, we might do things like go to practice. Things that we might do in the PM might be, thinking, have dinner. We would have dinner in the PM. We would maybe brush our teeth. Although we would be doing that in the AM too, I hope. We would be going to bed. Because right around in our house, between 8 and 9 o'clock is when everyone goes to sleep. Okay, so let's go back to our timeline for a minute. We started at midnight, and then we went through the hours after midnight, AM, 1 a.m., all the way to noon. And right at noon is when it switches from AM to PM. So then we have all of the PM hours and all the things that we do in the PM hours. And then it goes to midnight again. And then, if we were looking at the clock, it would start AM again. So let's look at the clock for a quick minute. Okay, here's our clock. Now let's look what happens as our clock goes around as we move from AM to PM. So we're starting here at midnight or 12 a.m. The clock, the minutes start to tick around. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. It's got to go all the way around. And in the United States, we measure time in 12-hour increments. So every 12 hours, it changes from AM to PM. I've now gone 6 hours. I have to go 6 more. It's still not PM yet. 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. I've made it around the clock 12 hours, and now it is PM. So let's talk about why AM and PM are important. Why does it matter? Why do we need to have AM and PM? Well, it's important. If I look at the clock and it's, let's put a time like 5. Well, if it's 5 a.m., it's very different than if it was 5 p.m. At 5 a.m., I'm hopefully still sleeping. At 5 p.m., hopefully I'm at home and it's almost dinner time. So it matters whether it's 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. on the clock, right? If I say, hey, Bria, can you meet me at the park at 4 a.m. or 4 p.m. because at 4 a.m. I'm not going to the park. It's dark and I'm sleeping. But I could probably meet you there at 4 p.m. That's why it's important that we know a.m. and p.m. Okay, let's look at page 626. Right at the top it says the hours from midnight until noon are labeled a.m. And remember, I like to think of a.m. and an easy way to remember is after morning, a.m. A for after, M for morning. The hours from noon until midnight are labeled PM or past morning. P for past, M for morning. So what time do we go to school? We go to school at 8 a.m., right? After morning or after midnight. And when do we read a bedtime story? We would read a bedtime story at 8 p.m. or past midnight or past morning. So let's look at number 1. It's asking us to tell what time is shown for the activity. Write the time and then circle AM or PM. So the first thing I want to look at is the hour hand. The hour hand, remember, is the shorter one. It's pointing right at the 10. So I know it's going to be in the 10 o'clock hour, and my minute hand is at the top. Remember, when the minute hand is at the top, I know it's o'clock, and in this case, it's 10 o'clock. So let's write 10 o'clock, and we write that by writing a 10 in the hour space and zeros for the minutes. That shows 10 o'clock. Now, if I'm in art class, is it 10 a.m. or 10 p.m.? It would be 10 a.m., right? Because it's not past morning yet. It's after midnight. All right, let's look at number 2. The first thing I want to do again is look at that hour hand. Now in this case, it's not on the 8 and it's not on the 9, but since it's not quite to the 9, that means it's still in the 8 o'clock hour. If you look at where the minute hand is, it's on the 6. It's half past the 8 o'clock hour, but if I'm writing that on a digital clock, it would look more like this. 8 is the hour, and the minutes are 30. Remember, you could skip count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Now, if I'm going to bed, is it AM or is it PM? It's going to be PM, past morning time. All right, let's look at number 3. Number 3, let's look at our hour hand first. It's right on the 4, so that tells me it's in the 4 o'clock hour. My minute hand is at the top, and when the minute hand is at the top, I know it's o'clock. So let's write 4 o'clock on our digital clock. The hour is 4, the minutes are 0. If we're playing after school, is it going to be AM or PM? Hopefully you said PM, right? Because remember, right at noon, it turns to PM. So right at lunchtime at noon, it's now PM. Okay, down at the bottom of the page, it says talk math. I don't need you to write it, but I do want you to think about how you can remember AM and PM. If it's easier for you to remember on the timeline, then think about the timeline, right? Midnight, right around there is noon, and then it becomes midnight again. So anything between this and this is AM. Anything between after lunch to midnight is PM, okay? Or if you remember after midnight or past morning, however it's easier for you to remember, I want you to start thinking about that, okay? Let's turn to page 627. Okay, let's start up here on my own. It's asking us to tell what time is shown for the activity. Write the time. Circle AM or PM. Okay, so number 4, eat breakfast. So where's my hour hand pointing? It's pointing right at the 7. The minute hand is at the top. That tells me that it is 7 o'clock. That's how we write 7 o'clock. Now, am I eating breakfast in the AM or in the PM? We're eating breakfast in the AM, so sometime after midnight has already passed. All right, number 5, wash the dog. First thing I'm going to do is look at my hour hand. It's pointing right at the 2, so I know it's the 2 o'clock hour. There's my minute hand. Let's skip count. 5, 10, 15. So it's 2:15. And remember what that's called? Sometimes we say it's a quarter past. So we've gone a quarter of the way around the clock. So it's a quarter past 2 o'clock. Okay, am I washing the dog at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m.? Hopefully you said p.m. Oops. There we go. Because if it's 2 a.m., I really hope you're sleeping because it's only been 2 hours past midnight. So it's got to go all the way past noon, and it's got to be 2 hours past noon, and that's probably when you'd be walking or washing the dog. Okay, number 6, go swimming. All right, let's look at our hour hand first. It's not pointing right at the 12, but it's not quite to the 1 yet. That tells me it's the 12 o'clock hour. Then I'm going to skip count my way around the clock. Remember, each one is 5 minutes, right? Each number represents 5 minutes going past. So let's skip count. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So if the hour is 12, the minutes are 35. Okay. So am I going swimming at 12:35 a.m. or 12:35 p.m.? So remember, if a.m. is after midnight, it's only been 35 minutes past midnight. So you should still be sleeping. But if it's past morning, then it would be 35 minutes past 12 or past noon. So it's more likely that you would go swimming at 12:35 p.m. Okay. Number 7 says, tell what time is shown for the activity. Draw the hands on the clock to show the time. Circle AM or PM. Okay, let's look at number 7, soccer practice. The time shows 3:30. So I'm going to have my hour hand pointing at the 3, 30, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, if you didn't remember where the minute hand should be. Okay, so that shows 3:30. Now, am I going to soccer practice at 3:30 a.m. or am I going to soccer practice at 3:30 p.m.? Hopefully you said p.m. because it's past morning. It's been 3 hours and 30 minutes past noon. So that's p.m. Okay, sleeping in bed. The digital clock says 2:30. So let's draw 2:30 on the clock. Put my hour hand right at the 2. The 30 is like what we just did. It's going to be pointing down at the 6. That says 2:30. So now I'm sleeping in my bed. Am I sleeping in my bed at 2:30 a.m. or 2:30 p.m.? Okay, remember, let's look at number 5. Remember we were washing the dog at 2:15 p.m.? So what might we be doing at 2:30 a.m., right? We might be sleeping at 2:30 a.m. All right, eat dinner. The clock says 6:45, so let's put my hour hand first, pointing at the 6:45. I'm going to need to skip count my way around. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. That means my minute hand is going to be pointing at the 9. So 6:45 looks something like that. Okay, am I eating dinner at 6:45 a.m. or 6:45 p.m.? So it's been 6 hours and 45 minutes past midnight. Would I be eating dinner? No, because that would make it really, really early in the morning. If you remember back when we went to school, you probably woke up around sometime around 6:45. So you're going to eat dinner around 6:45 p.m. Okay, and I know sometimes it gets confusing if it's a.m. or p.m. Don't worry about it. It's okay if it's still confusing to you. The more that we do it, the more that we talk about it, the more it will start to make sense to you, okay? So let's do number 10. Complete each sentence. Write midnight or noon. So number 10. At blank, I'm usually asleep. At midnight or at noon? Write in what you think. I'm going to write midnight. I'm usually sleeping at midnight. Okay, and what about number 11? It says, at blank, I may be eating my lunch. Midnight or noon? I'm going to write noon. Okay? Okay, let's turn to page 628. Okay, let's look at number 12. Read it with me. Zach has lacrosse practice at 4. Would that likely be at 4 a.m. or 4 p.m.? Think back to the beginning of our lesson on page 625 when I wrote down some of the things that we might do in the p.m. If you remember, one of the things I said was we might go to practice. We don't want to do practice at 4 a.m. We're still sleeping at 4 a.m. So Zach has practice at 4 o'clock p.m. Okay. Let's look at number 13. It is 2:25. Lakota is going to the library in 1 hour. On the clock, show the time she will go to the library and then circle a.m. or p.m. Okay, so let's look at this. First, what I want to do is I want to put the time that it is right now. So I'm going to write 2, and I'm going to do it in blue so we can see the difference, right? if it's 2:25 right there, it's about what 2:25 would look like. It's 2:25 right now. Lakota is going to go to the library in 1 hour. That means this minute hand needs to go around 60 minutes. So and remember, once it goes around, it's going to change. It's going to go 1 hour. So if we think of like 2 o'clock, the next hour would be 3 o'clock, right? But we have minutes to worry about right now. So it's 2:25. So if I go start at 2:25 and I go around my clock 1 time, the new time is going to be, it's going to move 1 hour. The next hour is 3, right? It's going to look like that. So what time will she go to the library? She's going to go at 3:25. Is it going to be AM or PM? If we're going to practice in the PM, we're going to the library in the PM too. Okay, last one of the day. Number 14. It's 3 o'clock a.m. Are you more likely to be on your way home from school or sleeping in your bed? So remember, a.m. is after midnight. So if it's 3 a.m., it's been 3 hours past midnight. What are you doing 3 hours past midnight? Hopefully, you're sleeping. So go ahead and write sleeping. Okay, that's it for our lesson today. I want you guys to go ahead and do page 629 and 630 for homework, and I will meet you guys back on the next lesson.